This reading is from Resmaa Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hands, and it has a longer title that I'll be sharing during the sermon. The soul nerve, and he's talking about the vagus nerve, is where we experience a felt sense of love, compassion, fear, grief, dread, sadness, loneliness, hope, empathy, anxiety, caring, disgust, despair, and many other things that make us human. When your body has an emotional response, such as when your stomach clenches, your voice catches, your pulse races, your shoulders tighten, your breathing quickens, your body braces for impact, or you have a sense that danger is lurking, that's your soul nerve at work. When you feel your heart opening or closing down, when you feel anxious in the pit of your stomach, when you sense that something wonderful or terrible is about to happen, when something feels right or wrong in your gut, when your heart sinks, when your spirit soars, this is all your soul nerve. One of the main purposes of the soul nerve is to receive fight, flee, or freeze messages from your lizard brain and spread them to the rest of your body. Another purpose is precisely the opposite, to receive and spread the message of, it's okay, you're safe right now, you can relax.
It's a long, long road from which there is no return. While we're on our way, why not share? And the road doesn't weigh me down at all. It ain't heavy, not heavy at all. It ain't heavy, not heavy at all. It ain't heavy. He's my brother. He's my brother. He's my
Okay, I am going to say it. That song is one of my instant mood shifters. And I don't know about you, but you know the original, right? The road is long. I have that on my iTunes playlist, and I will play it on repeat and sing it really loudly. And it's very effective, I can guarantee it. And you might cry, and that's okay. So that's really nice that that happened to be your selection today. Thank you. Visiting family one time, it was a long time ago, 15, 18 years ago, I noticed their toddler son in the living room by himself because everybody's kind of busy in the kitchen, and he was staring up at an enormous television screen. His tiny face and expression of wonder or awe or maybe stupefaction. I don't know at that age if there's a big difference, you know? But whatever was playing on the screen was nothing unusual in an American household anyway. A loud adventure type movie or TV show. And what I remember is like a car chase and a shoot 'em up. It was really loud, lots of cutting edits, it was fast, big soundtrack, boom, boom, boom. And as I stood for just a couple minutes and watching this little tiny body absorb it all, it felt to me like all the action and the sound was going right through that child. Because I realized this is all actually literally bigger than he is. Later, when I was learning more about trauma response, about the fight, flee, freeze, and fawn that happens to human bodies in response to shocking events, that memory came back to me. Was this child being entertained or traumatized? And this isn't to judge putting kids in front of screens. I know if I was a parent, I would definitely be sitting my kid in front of the TV and handing them an iPad. So there's no judgment there. It's just to recognize and think with you about the fact that every subsequent American generation since the invention of the at-home television set has had increasingly sophisticated, interactive, stereophonic, and supersized entertainment, information, and content available to them in their own homes or carried with them or in their ear 24 hours a day. And that does something to us. And simply for our reflection this morning, how is constant exposure to violent and distressing news, not just violent entertainment, but news about our communities, about our world, affecting our ability to remain present to life as it is and to remain human, awake, responsive, rather than just reactive. Reaction is involuntary. Reactions are happening constantly to our bodies 1,000 times a day. When we hear something, see something, experience something, our brains and our bodies react to that stimulus through reflex action. And Resmaa Menakem in the reading described some of them. But here are a couple of others. Jumping back onto the curb at the oncoming car. When you get a tingle at the back of your neck when somebody kind of dangerous tries to engage you. Recoiling and throwing the carton of milk away immediately when you smell it's turned. It could kill you, make you so sick. Pulling the child away from the hot stove. You don't think it through first. So this is the reptilian or lizard brain at work, the amygdala, which pumps stress hormones that signal run, hide, jump, freeze. And that part of our brain that has probably saved many of our lives here in this very room, probably all of ours at one point. God bless the lizard brain. But we are at a point as a species that we have to honestly evaluate and keep evaluating what happens when that part of our brain gets activated as frequently as it is being these days, very much with the help of technology. Brain evolution has not kept pace with the evolution of technology, and we are feeling that in our nervous systems and in the shared nervous system that is our society. I know I've talked about this before, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that we have such fresh occasion to need to talk about it again. Not very far in the past, humans shared news in much more limited and slower ways. They worked during the sun up, and when the sun went down, most activity quieted or ceased. If there was a war, you might hear updates by letter, weeks after something happened, usually, or you would hear it from a town crier, or somebody reading a dispatch from a general in the town square. And you would be gathered with other people while this happened. News of a plague would come from messengers into your village, or again, by letter. You might hear somebody tell a story or sing a song, as the balladeers used to do, about a grisly crime. Or you might see one acted out on the stage, written by Mr. Thomas Kidd or William Shakespeare. But there was not any possibility for a very long time in human history of sitting ourselves in front of a massive screen in a cinema or at home, or queuing up podcasts to spend literally all day doom scrolling or crisis scrolling or listening to reports of the most depraved of human behaviors to activate your sense of horror and haunt your imagination and ruin your sleep and deeply distress you throughout the day with no sense of knowing what to do. Now we are flooded constantly and our bodies are trying to cope. I think most of us who are gathered here this morning know intellectually how we would like to try to cope. We want to stay apprised. Sometimes we don't have a choice, like Scott this week at Salem State. There is a crisis, a violent act, and boom, you're involved. But a lot of times we try to balance our intake. We are thoughtful about the world's problems, about our community's problems. We understand, we know we're connected spiritually, environmentally, politically, and economically to everyone else. Those are all responses. Those are all when the cognitive and reasoning parts of our brains are able to lead the charge, to make decisions, to say, okay, I'm going to decide how much I'm going to take in. But it's very, very hard, and therefore what we are experiencing much more frequently in our bodies and in our families and our communities is reaction, stress response. If you do not know whether to watch videos of atrocities occurring in real time, or if you don't know how to process what you have seen, if you have been watching them, you're not alone. And the truth is that nobody knows how to process it. Only you and your body and your soul know how this is affecting you and what you should do. This is a new world, as I said, of media, technology, and not only the barrage of information, images, and video footage, but also, my God, now the manipulation of images and videos through AI and editing. So as we're reeling from the news, part of our mind has every reason to ask, is this even real? We have every reason to be bewildered and distraught. But what do we do? What do we do? Opting out is not an option for moral people. The better and more loving world that we want to create is relying on us to pay attention and to know what is happening down the street, in local organizations, where our kids are going to school, on our beaches, and across the world. And across the world. The overwhelm is serious. It can be paralyzing. But the fact is, we can't put ourselves in the service of any justice, wholeness, and healing unless we are not in psychological trauma trances and paralyzed by all this information that we are getting. I really like that term, psychological trance. I heard a therapist use it earlier this week. So the first thing we actually must do is attend to our bodies. That might be a new way of thinking for a lot of us. Thinking isn't going to get us out of shock. It isn't something that actually ends up solving that many problems. It has limited capacity to heal and equip anyone to cope with reality. Now, as someone who finds tremendous inspiration and solace through study, learning, and reading, this has been really hard for me to accept. We believed, maybe you believe this with me, that our intellectual capacity would solve all things. But we're learning now that it is the body that actually knows far more. Resmaa Menakem is one of the very good teachers of settling the body. In his book, My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies, he teaches about the vagus nerve, and that's spelled V-A-G-U-S, not like Las Vegas, but vagus nerve, or what he calls, as we heard earlier in the reading, the soul nerve. An organ that wasn't even discovered in medicine until 1921. So research is pretty new on this. This is the unifying organ of our entire nervous system. And Menakem writes, the vagus nerve is not a nerve in the way we typically think of one. It is a highly complex and extraordinarily sensitive organ that communicates through vibes and sensations. This communication occurs not only between different parts of our body, but also from one person to another. Your soul nerve reaches into most of your body, including your throat, lungs, heart, stomach, liver, spleen, pancreas, kidney, and gut, both your large and small intestine. It is the largest organ in your body's autonomic nervous system, which regulates all of your body's basic functions. And so all of this sense that your stomach ache when you're sad is kind of in your mind, it's in your body, it's in your it's in this whole system. Menakem explains that the largest part of this nerve goes through the gut, which has about 100 million neurons, and this is why some biologists call the gut the second brain, where our body senses flow, coherence, and the rightness or wrongness of things. I feel very fortunate to be living in a time when so much research is being done on calming the vagus nerve. Doesn't humanity clearly so badly need tools for the addressing of unhealed trauma? Because what is happening in Israel and Palestine right now but cycles of trauma repeating themselves? When I pray about the abject condition of the world, I hold out hope that future generations will all have learned from a young age about generational trauma, that they will know the pain of their ancestors has transmitted itself to them not just through memory and stories, but also, as research is now realizing, through their genetics, through their DNA. They will learn how to recognize, therefore, when they are activated to the fight, flee, and freeze response and engage in body practices to settle themselves so that they don't harm themselves or others. That goes for all of us. Menakem writes, when one settled body encounters another, this can create a deeper settling of both bodies. But when one unsettled body encounters another, the compounding effect can turn a peaceful crowd into an angry mob. And he does a lot of work on racial trauma and policing, and obviously we see the stress responses causing shootings and so forth. I was in fear for my life, and so I didn't see that that was an 11-year-old, and I shot him. You already know and do some of the body practices that settle the body and the soul nerve. You do them naturally, humming, oming, rocking back and forth, maybe in a chair or maybe just self-soothing, rubbing your belly, And you see children do this very naturally. Deep breathing, dancing, and of course singing, especially singing with others. So while I was learning, and while I have been learning about these settling practices, it occurred to me that, of course, worship is one of the most ancient settling practices that people have done over many, many thousands of years to collectively soothe their soul nerves. Even in very active and ecstatic forms of worship, the shared space, the breathing together, the intention being shared to release fear and other stressors, create centeredness and groundedness, rituals. Pay attention to how your body feels when you come to light that candle for peace, when you come into the very building, when you stand up, when you sit down, all of that. And coming to realize that worship is itself a central settling practice helped me in conversations that I had with some members of our congregation in the past couple of weeks since Francine and I gave a dialogue sermon during which she shared some very intense and graphic stories of religious abuse that she suffered as a child. When we were up here together that day, and Francine and I have talked about this, when we were up here today in those chairs, Francine shared one particularly upsetting memory, and I heard this like a gasp come from many in the congregation, a deep, quick intake of breath, like that. And I thought, oh boy, that's a sound we don't want to hear during the worship service. Because it was a collective, embodied, empathic response, signaling that something had come in that was causing people's bodies and breath to freeze. And I thought, okay, I need to think about that and review that. And I did, and some of you helped me do that, and Francine and I talked about it. And I really appreciate those conversations. Because when we gather for worship, we might definitely go into challenging ideas together. We might not always be comfortable. That's okay. But what is not okay is for me or any worship leader to present any subject in such a way as to cause the congregation to have a trauma response of freezing or fleeing or feeling that shocked. Now, Francine has lived with her story for many, many years. And she has had a lot of help in processing it and integrating it into her life. And I also had time. I also have a lot of experience hearing stories of religious trauma. But I got to hear Francine's when we prepared our dialogue, but no one else listening was prepared. And I put a warning in the order of service that some content might be upsetting, but as someone pointed out, maybe that could have gone out earlier. Whatever the case, what I have learned is that I will be very extra mindful moving forward to include painful and upsetting realities in such ways that respect the tenderness and the trust of this particular setting. I've always made that a priority because God knows there's a lot of painful things in the world to share. But in this new format of doing a dialogue, I failed. As we continue to show up for each other's lives and the larger life that beckons our attention and engagement, I hope that we will continue to integrate and honor the wisdom of the body, our first responders, individually and together. If we are to create and contribute to environments of peace and wholeness, we must know how to settle ourselves. Our brain knows survival commands of fight, flee, and freeze. But in community, we develop more for our souls. Abide, listen, accompany, companion, attend, and love. Those are the survival commands for the soul. So may it be. Amen. And peace.